Have you heard this cooking advice about bringing meat to room temperature before cooking it? Yeah, like don't put the steak straight from the fridge on the grill. Let it sit on the counter for like an hour. Students ask me about this in class all the time. And I always tell them that bringing meat to room temperature doesn't help. All the food science guys like Kenji Alt and Meathead Goldwyn think the room temperature idea is completely bonkers. Based on my own testing, I completely agree with them. It doesn't really help with even cooking, at least not enough. But I was wondering if we were throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. Could there be other benefits to letting meat sit at room temperature? Like maybe could it help with browning? Could it reduce sticking? I decided to set up a little experiment to find out. Here is a bit of background about this whole room temperature thing. For hundreds of years, people have tried to cook their meat more evenly. And for hundreds of years, it was a struggle. The temperature they wanted inside, say, a steak or a roast was about 130 Fahrenheit. But they were trying to get there by placing meat on hot grills, skillets, and ovens, whose temperature was about 400 to 800 Fahrenheit. As you can imagine, by the time the inside got to 130, the outer layers were overcooked. In the attempt to shorten the exposure to such harsh heat, people thought that they can make their meat cook faster and more evenly if they started it from room temperature of about 70 Fahrenheit instead of the fridge temperature of about 40 Fahrenheit. Samin Nosrat in her Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat book says that these 30 degrees can make or break your dish. Warming the meat up like that before cooking it helps it brown better and cook more evenly. And she is not the only one. So many of my cookbooks say that, even the ones that I really like Zuni Cafe. I know what you're thinking. Couldn't you just make your oven, skillet or grill a little bit cooler? Samin says no. First of all, you need all that heat to produce good browning, and second of all, grills, skillets and ovens are unpredictable. Who knows what the temperature of that grill or skillet really is? Even ovens fluctuate. I completely agree with her about the unpredictability of heat. But the question is, does leaving meat at room temperature actually help? First, let's consider the effects of starting at room temperature on how evenly the meat cooks. I once tested the internal temperature of a thick ribeye after leaving it out on the counter for an hour and got 45 Fahrenheit. Yes, after a full hour, it went up from 38 Fahrenheit to 45 Fahrenheit. I mean, inside the steak, not the surface. This experiment was done by many people like Kenji Alt and Meathead Goldwyn, and we all got the same results. Bringing a large piece of meat up to room temperature in the middle requires so many hours that the meat would be in danger of spoiling. The downside here far outweighs the benefits, if any. Luckily, we live in the 21st century and have all sorts of methods for cooking meat evenly. Sous vide, starting it in a low temperature oven, or frequent flipping are all way more effective at producing evenly cooked inside than bringing meat to room temperature. This was tested so thoroughly and by so many people, I didn't feel I needed to test it anymore. What I felt still needed investigation was the effect of letting meat sit at room temperature before cooking on browning and sticking. But how do you test that? I mean, do you just put two steaks on the grill, one straight from the fridge and the other left at room temperature for an hour and see which one browns faster? That did not strike me as good experimental design. There are so many things that affect browning. The fat content, the heat, the surface moisture. If I wanted good data, I had to find some way to keep these variables constant or to compensate for them by doing the experiment multiple times. I quickly eliminated beef steaks as test subjects. Their fat content varies so much, It's hard to buy two identical steaks. No two ribeyes are the same, ever. And buying 10 steaks to account for the variability was out of my budget. Besides, steaks don't really stick. So they might tell me something about browning, but not about sticking. After considering many different test subjects, I settled on the tail portion of the salmon fillet and skinless, boneless chicken thighs. The reason I chose salmon is because I wanted a protein with a tendency to stick, and nothing sticks on the grill better than a delicate fish. The tastier, thicker end of salmon is all over the place with the fat content and thickness, so I went with the more consistent tail end. For chicken, I needed to use skinless pieces. Skin can be thicker and thinner, and I didn't want to deal with that kind of variability. Even skinless thighs weren't that even. Some had big strips of fat on them and some didn't. But I trimmed off all the outside fat to even out the playing field. The next variable I had to deal with was salt. Can you think of any ways in which salt affects browning? Yes, salt draws the moisture to the surface, which can delay browning because water can't get above 212 Fahrenheit, and the browning reaction needs at least 330 Fahrenheit. If I sprinkled a bit more salt on one piece than on the other, or if I waited an extra minute before putting a piece of fish on the grill, I could easily change how well it browned and how much it stuck. I considered skipping salt entirely, but then I decided against it because that wasn't a realistic setup. I mean, who cooks their meat without salt, right? So I decided to salt all my salmon and chicken the day before. This would give the salt a chance to absorb and distribute relatively evenly. Right before cooking, I dried all the proteins very thoroughly so that there was no worry about surface moisture difference from one piece to another. And last but not least important variable was the heat. Heat is notoriously difficult to control and to keep perfectly consistent. To account for the fact that some pieces will get more heat than others, I decided to do the experiment twice. Ideally, I would have done it 20 times, and when I get a grant to do this research, I sure will. But for now, twice is better than once, right? Since grills tend to be hotter toward the center and cooler towards the outside, I gave the center spot to the fridge piece on the first trial and the room temperature piece on the second trial. All the room temperature pieces were kept at room temperature for 1 hour. And here is the trial 1. Room temperature piece closer to the edge, fridge piece closer to the center. After 3 minutes, they browned enough to flip. Sorry about my arm. After the first piece, I realized that I was blocking the camera, so this video does get better. The sticking was about the same for both pieces, and so was the browning. Couple of minutes later, the skin browned too, and I took both pieces off the grill. For the second trial, the room temperature piece got the center spot and the fridge piece got the edge spot. 3 minutes later, they were ready to flip, and now I knew to keep my arms out of the way. The sticking and browning were the same. The skin looked about the same too. The 2 pieces on the right were the room temperature pieces, and the 2 on the left were straight from the fridge. Of course, we want to make sure that this doesn't just apply to salmon, so let's do the same experiment with chicken. For chicken, I did all 4 pieces at the same time because chicken is way faster to flip than salmon. After about 3 minutes, they browned enough to flip. Still no significant difference in browning. If anything seemed to affect the browning, it was the placement on the grill. That's kind of what I expected. Bringing meat to room temperature didn't make any difference to browning and sticking on the grill. But would the same be true in a skillet? Let's find out. I cooked 2 pieces of chicken in a stainless steel skillet. One sat at room temperature for 1 hour and the other one was straight from the fridge. Here's what the browning looked like. I've noticed that whenever I cook anything in the skillet, the right back side always browns faster. I'm guessing because the flame on my stove maybe isn't perfectly even, or maybe my cooking grate is slightly tilted. So I did another trial, swapping the location of the pieces. Here is what the browning looked like for the second trial. So yes, the same seems to apply to cooking in a skillet. I can't say that any of this surprised me, but here is something that did. I thought it would be interesting to know the surface temperature of the proteins before they went on the heat. So I used my handy-dandy infrared thermometer to do that. The room temperature salmon registered about 63 Fahrenheit. The ambient temperature of my kitchen was in the high 60s that day, so I guess that made sense. But the fridge salmon registered about 48 Fahrenheit. What? 48? That's too warm for the fridge. First, I panicked that my fridge broke, but I stuck my trusty Thermopan into random foods in my fridge and got 38 Fahrenheit. Then I thought my infrared thermometer broke, so I tried pointing it at the chicken that was still sitting in the fridge at that point and got 38 Fahrenheit. How could that be? It couldn't take me more than 5 minutes to unwrap that salmon, dry it with paper towels, and take its temperature. Could its surface go up 10 degrees in 5 minutes? When I was cooking the chicken, I decided to find out. I took the surface temperature of the chicken in the fridge. I opened the fridge door, pointed the gun at the chicken, and took its temperature before even removing it from the fridge. I got 38 Fahrenheit. Then I got the chicken out of the fridge, pressed HPs between paper towels, and carried the chicken outside to the grill. That took about 5 minutes at most. And can you believe it? The surface of that chicken got to 47 Fahrenheit. So the surface temperature goes up way faster than people expect, and the inside temperature of the meat goes up way slower than people expect. The surface temperature difference between my room temperature and fridge samples turned out to be less than 15 degrees, not the 30 degrees that you'd expect, and it didn't seem to make any noticeable difference in browning and sticking when using cooking methods like grilling and searing. Maybe it makes a difference when roasting in the oven. I haven't tested it yet, but my hypothesis is that it wouldn't make any noticeable difference. Hey, all you scientists out there, I know you're watching. Do you have suggestions for improving my experimental design? Or maybe there are other cooking do's and don'ts that you want me to test? Let me know in the comments below. Hope you can put all that science to work for your 4th of July cookout. Keep that meat cold and keep that grill hot. Here are more grilling videos for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.